And our next speaker is she's Chavonne Odom. She's actually it's funny. I haven't seen too much from Chavonne, so this makes me really really interested. And I love that I haven't seen content or heard much from her, but she's really new to the community. I know she contacted Emily about TFF and presenting and being able to share her knowledge. She's a district dwelling wife here locally. She's a mother of two, a recovering marketer, and a really inquisitive person, a fan of most music genres, which means she's a lot like me. I like all this too, but at the same time, her big one is she's going to present on public sector engagement rock stars. So this was my previous life and world. So I'm really excited to see this. Siobhan, are you on? Can you hear me just fine?
I am, yes. Thank you, Caesar.
Excellent, excellent. So I'm gonna pass this on, but Siobhan, I'm so excited to see this, and I can't wait to see where you go from here. So please go on and take it away. Here, let me give you control of the screen.
All right, awesome. So I'm super excited to be here today. As Caesar mentioned, I am newer to Tableau. It doesn't mean that I haven't had a crush for many, many years on it, but I'm excited to actually be here talking about something that feels very much like my wheelhouse. And I'm excited to learn more about Tableau this year. Over this past year, I've actually been working with it at work. And so it's been this great collision of all the things that I love. So excited to share some insight on who's really rocking public sector conversations these days. So the goal is to illustrate how government communicators use performance insight. And really what they're doing in this vein is obviously looking to communicate effectively with their segmented audiences, including the general public and sometimes professionals and a specific industry vertical. And then ultimately, they're looking to drive behavior change and activate audiences. And oftentimes in the health sector, which is where I'm focused, they're looking to also prove the effectiveness of evidence-based programs. And so an example of that would be the district, who has really taken a hold of the maternal health rates and the impact that maternal health and the lack of maternal health has had on mothers in the district. And so that's something that they are looking to combat. This past year, I believe a couple months ago, the mayor held her first ever summit on infant health. And of course, maternal health is included in that. And so one of the key components of what they're looking to do obviously would be technology. But a second piece is obviously going to be very much around how they're communicating with the different segments that they need to effectively serve and communicate. And one aspect of that also is inclusive of this evidence-based, facts or evidence that they've seen that actually helps to improve initiatives, improve care, and improve outreach. And so I have this very super lofty goal of being able to one day look at this data in Tableau and then also overlay much of the other data that's involved outside of just the communications realm to really see what the impact is. And so that's just one example of, how government communicators would use those performance insights to really drive initiatives and ultimately care. So a little bit about me. I'm a recovering digital marketer who's obsessed with the art, science, and psychology of marketing. So I love it all. And I'm super excited to now be in a role where I can actually help coach other folks who, have this as their day job. A couple of my obsessions, clearly music, which is why I named this presentation or made this presentation about rock stars. Actually considered pop stars, but I wanted to keep this accessible. But yeah, I love all genres of music, and so I don't discriminate. I'm not necessarily a purist. I think in these days and times, everybody wants to be a rock star still. So that's something that's certainly classic about rock music, and so that's where the influence came from today. Data, and more specifically being able to make confident decisions based on data, is another one of my obsessions. And then, lately it's been I've had a great obsession with Tableau, again, because I've been able to use it professionally, and it's really opened my mind to a lot of the possibilities that I'd have to use it to visualize data to solve, or really, start to solve really huge problems. So that's a little bit about me. And then the goal here is to understand how states and federal government agencies communicate effectively. We want to first look at, of course, the people. It's not a foreign concept to most people. It's pretty standard these days in terms of the overlay there with regard to having the right people, process, and technologies in place to help improve performance and optimize performance. And it's no different in the communications sector or in communications when it comes to the public sector. So first, let's take a look at who's doing the work. So the doers in the public sector fall into a couple different categories. Primarily what I see are program managers who are outreach driven, but they wear many hats and may not necessarily be skilled in communications. Public affairs managers typically will handle press releases, external affairs, sometimes even government relations, and they're dealing a lot with new media and social media. And then you'll have your communication specialists who are skilled in any combination of or focus on content, web, marketing, tech, and social channels. And so that's a really, sort of succinct look at who's actually doing the work. Demographically, they do tend to be female, but there are, obviously men who are in this industry as well. And, that's one key element that I've seen as I've really actually worked with a lot of these clients, which was interesting, is just really the breadth of what they have to take on. And again, of course, mapping that to the skills that they may or may not have and how to really close those gaps quickly if you're trying to affect and drive outcomes. So next, let's take a look at benchmarking to improve performance. So businessdictionary.com defines benchmarking as a measurement of the quality of an organization's policies, products, programs, strategies, etc., and their comparison with standard measurements or similar measurements of its peers. So the objectives of benchmarking are to determine what and where improvements are called for, to analyze how the organizations achieve their high performance levels, and then 3, to use this information to improve performance. So one of the really cool things about the company that I work for is that they actually produce an annual benchmark report, which really helps government entities understand sort of how they perform across verticals, whether it be health and human services or more regulatory vertical. So I find that a really super impactful report, because as a recovering marketer, I know the results-driven environment, and also just as your head's down as a marketer, continuing to sort of grind with metrics. At some point, you look up and you want to understand, what does this all mean in terms of what you're seeing, and how do you compare it to folks who have similar missions, and how are they doing? And ultimately, you'd want to look at that to be able to understand, is there information sharing that could be taking place to help folks who are performing not as well, or who may not be implementing best practices, to actually learn from their peers? And so that's another really cool aspect of my company as well. We put on every year a summit where we bring together the folks who are doing this important work. So happy to talk to anybody about that at any time after. But let's move on. So the next step is for us to take a look at comparing and highlighting our powerhouse performers using Tableau visualizations. And we'll start with the inevitable open and click rates, which are very essential measurements in understanding email communications and your performance. And so we'll start with the open rate. It's according to Campaign Monitor, the open rate for an email campaign is a measure of how many recipients viewed your email. One interesting note that Campaign Monitor points out here is that open rates are not 100% accurate measurement. If you're familiar with the industry, you probably understand that typically open rates are really, really underreported. And that's because of really cool feature improvements that email clients like Gmail and Outlook have made, where you can actually preview a message without opening it. And so while open rates tend to be underreported, a click rate can become your very best friend, in the sense that it really gives you even deeper insight into who's opening and clicking through your message, and effectively whether they're taking the action that you want them to take. So the click rate, real quickly, we'll understand here from Campaign Monitor, is the percentage of people who click on a link or an image within an email. And many platforms will allow you to get super granular about each link that you're adding to your email. But typically our focus here, or my focus when I'm supporting clients and helping them to really strategically think about this, is to really isolate, think about isolating those links and those URLs to really drive the action that you're looking to drive. I think we all know that, this attention economy, as they're calling it, it's really hard to get people's attention. It's really hard to hold their attention, and it's really hard to get them to take action. So it's cool to have different channels that you can leverage to do that, including email and not social media, but SMS, so texting. We all know that, if you get a text about a bill that's late, for example, you're probably very likely to hop on that. Whereas for email, you may feel a little bit burnt out, and maybe you only check your email a couple times a day at very specific times of the day. A mobile phone can really be effective in sending SMS and getting folks to take action really quickly. So let's take a quick look at what we have here today with regard to click rates and open rates in our first visualization. So I use the scatter plot here from Tableau to really take a look and compare the performance. Excuse me, I'm just going to move my bar here out of the way. So we've taken a look here at the performance, and what I really love about this is that you can actually see both of them together. And sometimes, because the open rate is so underreported, seeing that click rate in relation to the opens can be really effective. And so, speaking to sort of my point earlier on, who can learn from whom, if we look at this, we can really see how effective Debbie is. If we look at the kind of olive-colored dot that's up on the right-hand side. And we can also see that Aretha and Michael are making some really great strides when it comes to click rates. But if we look at open rate, it's interesting. You'll see that from Stevie on to Aretha, it goes sort of in a really increased manner, or it increases as you go along this list. And so, again, if you were only to look at open rates, you might just think, oh, Aretha's really outperforming everyone, and this is awesome, and she's really coming up with obviously some really compelling subject lines, appealing to folks' emotions. But again, that can be a super underreported metric. And so having that having that in comparison to the click rate is super effective in helping you dig a little deeper and understand, are we looking at open rates and click rates that are performing well, or are we looking at one or the other, and can we find any correlation in between in those, and can we test those correlations again to improve? And so, of course, the best practice of using a really compelling subject line, it looks like we have a lot of takers with regard to that, and then maybe we have a few people like Chuck and Elton and Joan who could use some support from their peers on how to really drive their open rates. And then when we look at the click rate, similarly, we can see that there are some high performers in click rates who could probably share a lot about what they're learning and really how to isolate and make their main call to actions a little bit more prominent. All right, so next, we'll look at engagement. So engagement is active, unique email recipients measured over 90 days. And that specifically is the definition from Granicus, which supplies GovDelivery, which is a communications platform exclusively used by government agencies. We can actually see the exact engagement for each of these folks, and we can see how they're, and we can really understand how those clicks and open rates led to engagement. And that is really what what engagement represents, is a combination of those two metrics. And so we can see, again, Aretha is really rocking it here, and so are Betty and Brittany. But what is super interesting here, if we look at some of the values around the number of subscribers, for example, the other three metrics, or I'm sorry, the other three stats that we looked at there are not engaged the total subscribers, and the number of unique recipients. And those are all three very distinct categories. So your total subscribers represents the entire audience that you're managing, where your unique recipients is really going to be about folks who are actively engaging with who are actively receiving your content. And then the last engaged subscribers is actually going to be folks who are actively interacting with your content. So they're clicking through, they're taking the desired action. And a lot of times it's really important to understand, not just are we hitting those top level metrics, do we have an audience size that's, impressive? It's more about how often are we converting people to take the action that we want them to take. And so again, that's where this type of visual really comes in handy. You can actually look at each of these folks and get a sense of their all of those metrics together and how they're driving engagement rates. So if you look at someone like Bruce, who's got an engaged subscriber count of 179,000, and see that total subscriber count is much, much higher, and then his unique recipients is significantly higher as well than his engaged subscribers, you can tell that he's got some work to do. And then if you look at his engagement rate, again, being 20% or below, you can see that that engagement rate is struggling. And so Bruce could, again, use some best practices, some pointers from folks like Betty and Aretha who are significantly reaching their subscribers. And actually, Betty would be the best to call on here because she's got a total subscriber count that is vastly different as well from her engaged subscribers. But if we look at someone like Aretha, you can see how really focusing on making sure that she's engaging her entire audience has really, really driven her engagement rate to be through the roof. And so what we typically see with folks who are achieving a very steady or even increasing engagement rate is that over time, their audiences tend to be more engaged. They tend to really be a part of the conversation. And it ends up being not just a one-way conversation, but a two-way conversation, which ultimately is what we want in communications to be able to actually drive some action. Engagement metrics. So here we've displayed the engagement rate and using a different visualization, but we're able to see engagement, and we're also able to see another key metric called subscriptions per subscriber on the left-hand side. And that subscriptions per subscriber rate is a key metric that we use to help determine just what kind of depth you might have with your audience and how many touch points and how well are you executing on those touch points. So we'll pull in the second visualization here, which actually looks at both of them together. And again, the scatter plot gives you some great insight into who's really holding up their end of the bargain on both. And maybe you can spot some trends or some patterns. And, one thing that we see here again is that, clearly Aretha's killing it in engagement, but if we look at where she is on subscriptions per subscribers, can we note anything with relation to the other folks and their performance? And, you can see that she's almost achieved about 10 subscriptions per subscriber, which means the number of topics that each subscriber on average is subscribed to in her account environment is 10. And so that's a pretty high number of topics. And then another really sort of outlier here we'll see is if you go down to Chuck, you can see that Chuck's actually got over 70 subscriptions per subscriber, which means that he's obviously rocking out with the breadth of topics that he's offering, and perhaps even headed towards burnout when he's communicating on so many different topics. But again, you can see that he's doing an awesome job. And then if you look at where he lies on the engagement, you can actually see that there is a vast difference in his engagement rate. His engagement rate is only about 26%. And so when you think about how communicating across too many channels, or what some folks sometimes describe as stretching yourself too thin, you can quickly see how that's contributed to a much lower engagement rate for him. But one thing I will point out here is that, again, it's super important to get clear on what your goals are. A lot of organizations and agencies tend to have, just simply an awareness goal. They want to educate the public on, health initiatives, on healthy living, on, topics like that. But there can also sometimes be, really, really super important, again, actions that need to be taken. So for example, if you're looking to get folks registered or signed up for a healthcare plan, that's something that has a very, very clear call to action. And you want to really strategically think about how exactly to drive that action, especially if you have a short ramp up time or even a short window of time for folks to complete those types of actions. So again, super important to really get clear around what your goals are, and then especially what metrics are going to help you track to those goals. And so while we look at Chuck's performance on the engagement side and think, okay, that's super low, he could probably use some best practice support. Perhaps Chuck's goal is mainly to really reach a broad base of subscribers about a wide range of things. And so in that case, perhaps engagement for him on an account level isn't as important as it is on an actual topic level. All right. So some other examples here that we're actually I partnered with on our business intelligence team that can be super helpful when you're looking at account performance, your top 25 senders. So you can actually get some insight into who's actually performing the best. And again, because I really, really love our benchmark report, I use this one. And you can see here, you can actually really easily plot out who's performing above and who's performing below the benchmark. And that can also help when you're talking about maybe a state, example. Let's say you have agencies across the state who are communicating and you want to see, which agencies should we look at pairing or getting together to really understand how their counterparts are driving success. And so this type of visualization will give you some great insight into that. Another super helpful visualization is your channels, or dives a little bit deeper into the channels you're using. So
a quick 1 minute warning.
We're running thank you.
A little long, but
thank you. Yeah, no problem. So SMS sending over time is something that could be really insightful, especially if you need to actually, start to look at, the allotment that you have, for example, and closing that out or making sure that folks are using them with best practices employed. And then a couple of other things here. So SMS trends by sender can be super helpful. You can see which senders are sending out the most messages and when they're doing it. And then lastly, you can also look and dig deeper into engagement. And so then you can actually see which messages are most impactful. And you can also see that over a certain time frame, which can be super helpful in understanding how well you're performing by channel and specifically here with SMS. So that's my time for today. Thank you again for having me. And I look forward to hopefully meeting you all at some point soon, and also expanding my expertise when it comes to Tableau.
Chavonne, thank you so much for coming on. I'm really excited to see what you come up with next. And I really do want to reach out and see if we can meet up maybe at one of the district Tableau user groups. So it'd be great to actually.
Yeah, that would be awesome. I would love it.
Well, cool. If you can,
thank you so much, Caesar.
We've got the chat.
Absolutely.
So if anyone has questions, please go through and send them through to the chat room. But for now, I'm going to have to switch it over to our founders panel. I see them all.